Hi there, everybody. Welcome to our live Tuesday training in the Pilates Teacher Toolbox Facebook group. So excited to come to you today. I've had some requests for different things to put in for our mini trainings each week. And so today's mini training comes to you from a request I have from another student of mine who wanted to know a little bit more about how to activate the glute max muscle, meaning your biggest glute muscle on the backside of your body. So let me just demonstrate a little bit about what we were talking about. We were originally talking about the bridge and how to find alternate exercises that activate the glute max besides the bridge. So I'm going to come on to my mat here and just kind of demonstrate first the bridge, some of the concepts that we were talking about, and then I'm going to break out and give you some alternative exercises and what my thinking is and some of the cues that go along with those exercises, so that way you have a few more tools in your toolbox to give to your clients to help them feel and activate this muscle that for some clients, or many, it's really challenging to find and feel and sense. Okay, so I'm going to hop on my mat. You're welcome to join along with me if you would like to do these movements with me. I know some of you are very kinesthetic learners, so as you move along, sometimes it just makes more sense in the body. So I've got my bright red pants on for you today so you can see a little bit more about what's going on in the glute activation. So I'm going to lie down on my back here. Coming down onto the back. Often when we get in a bridge exercise, we'll cue the hamstrings and we'll cue the glutes to activate. Now, I have certain tools and tips that I'll save for a future video or training that have to do more with closed chain activation. This would be a closed chain activation. Your feet and arms are pressing into the mat. You have something to push into. But oftentimes what happens with the bridge exercise is the hamstrings tend to take over because clients aren't quite sure how to activate their glutes in this position. So you know that their hamstrings are doing more work than the glutes when clients get a hamstring cramp in the middle of the bridge, okay? So today, I'm not really discussing how to get out of a hamstring cramp. What today's topic is about is really more so on how to activate the gluteus maximus, right? How do you take the hamstring overwork out of the equation and really get into the glute max? So I have some open chain exercises for you, which for some clients are easier and some clients are harder than the closed chain. Today is going to be more open chain focused. So instead of being on your back for bridge, the first variation I want to show you is just using your plain mat. So no extra props or tools or any such thing like that. So you would simply flip over onto your belly and you would change the position. So come over onto the belly. Now from the abdominal position, the prone position, you first have to assume that your client is comfortable in this position. So commonly what we'll see is tight hip flexors. And when you see tight hip flexors, clients will be in what I call the teepee tent hip position. Meaning, I'm going to exaggerate this, but there's a lordosis in their low back, and you get this tenting at their hips here, right? Where the hips here, I'll lift this up, the hips are lifted and they're kind of creating a V at the front of the hips. This is your tight hip flexors. And if clients had this tight of hip flexors and couldn't straighten them out, in standing, they would be more like this. And they would not be able to straighten out their hips, or if you bring their chest upright, they would have a really big lordosis in their low back. So they would still have this slight V or tightening in the front of their hips, right? So coming back into prone, the first thing you want to do is ask, can they lower the tailbone down towards the floor? Can they zip up through the front of the abdominals?
And then can they stretch their kneecaps or quads to the end of the mat? And then the final cue would be, so you just cued them to stretch out long out of their legs. Now what about their hip bones? This is the big piece right here. Can they take their leg bones and pull them into the hip joint while simultaneously reaching their kneecaps towards the end of the table? Now notice I didn't say feet. If you cue the feet to reach, yes, that will get the whole leg to extend. However, it might put too much intention in the feet. So you want the stability at the thigh, okay? So front of the thigh, back of the thigh. Now here comes the exercise. Once you have all of those set up cues, and they have straightened out a bit more in their hip flexors. You really want their hip flexors as stretched as possible here. Now comes the glute activator. So you would bend one knee, start with single leg, not both. Bend one knee, flex the foot. Ask them again if there's any more room to reach that knee towards the end of the table. There was for me. Can they again zip up through the core and feel this big stretch from the knee all the way up to the rib cage? Once they have that, check, feel, see. Make sure that their glute max is activated here right away. It should be. Now keeping that activation, keeping all of those other connections, can they lift the heel towards the ceiling any amount and bring it back down without losing that activation? So this is very small on me. If you zoom in with your eyes, look, maybe I'm moving an inch. This is my hip flexor extension. So not hip flexor, this is my hip extension, right? Also because I'm talking, my core is not quite as engaged as it could be. Okay, so know that with clients, this hip extension might not be very big, but they're gonna be working like crazy. Now your job as a teacher is, as they lower down their knee, ask them to keep this glute max fired. They're not allowed to just let it go, right? So you don't let it go, push, let it go, push, let it go, push. You want to find activation, and then can you keep it for 5, down, and 4, down, and keep it, and keep encouraging those cues. 2 more, and now 1 more, and then rest, and a really wonderful release after that. All that work is just to shimmy the hips, wiggle it out, and then do the same thing on the second side. Now all of that is assuming that your client is comfortable in that prone position. So this would not be good for clients with low back pain, where lordosis increases the pain. This could just be muscular, or it could be any bony issues in the spine, like spondylolysis or spondylolisthesis, either of those. This might be too extreme of a position. So this is where the arc barrel comes into play. And you can do this over a large barrel. If you have a ladder barrel, this is a great place to do this. I don't have one here to demonstrate with you, but I have an arc barrel. So it would be very similar to the mat work, and I'll show you the benefits of using the arc barrel. So I'm gonna bring my arc barrel up onto the table here. Now you could face either direction. I happen to like to put the legs on the step side and the torso off of the other end. It just gives more availability to the body. So I'm gonna climb up here, making sure that there's room for legs off of one end and head off of the other. Now, climbing up here into the step, I'm going to lay over the peak of the barrel, come down onto my forearms. Now there are several positions here. We're gonna do the exact same exercise. But now, why are we on top of the barrel, right? So we always want to know the purpose. So the purpose of using the barrel is if clients are not comfortable in that prone position where they are on full stretch, remember, full stretch from the abdominals down to the knees, we want to give them
a more comfortable position to start. So if the client is in that type of body, by starting over the barrel, can you see now that there is a slight angle to my hip position? However, I'm supported. So I'm in neutral spine here in my upper body, finding neck, core, shoulder engagement. I have my hands in a clasp or prayer position to push, or you could push flat down or in fists. So whichever feels most connective to your client's shoulders. My body likes this today, so I'm gonna go with this position. Now from here, you would find the same exact cues. Tuck your toes under, reach your quads towards the end of the table, plug your leg bones in, zip up your core. I hope you could see that connection when I did that. Now, instead of doing bent knee, you could do a straight leg to start. So I'm gonna stick with the same leg close to the camera so you can see. So now, when I lift my leg, core connection, your client is only going to lift the leg as high as they can without losing that connection. And the benefit of being on top of the barrel is that the client's legs are starting at a different angle, right? So they're more so in the front area of the body, the front plane of the body. And now they're lifting towards neutral, but it's okay if they don't quite get to neutral. So previously, my body was starting here, and then I was asked to go higher when I was on the mat, right? So now your clients have a lower plane to start with, and they can go to their highest range. Maybe it's here, maybe it's here, maybe it's just up to neutral, but beyond neutral would be bonus, and that's more so that hip extension that you're doing on the mat. So you can find a different spot on top of the barrel, right? So having the hips right up at the peak gives the most room for working on hip extension and that glute max, which this big glute max muscle is going to be opposite of those height hip flexors. So you want to work that glute max. Now you could come a little bit lower, bring the torso down and bring your head on top. This would again give a little bit deeper angle, but it's harder to connect the core. So the client has to have more connectability in their body. And then you would do the same, any range of motion without losing those connections. Now to graduate them towards the mat, maybe you would bring them back a little more in this neutral place, chest in line. You would guide them in their connection from head to heel, and then they would do this. Now, could you go into that bent knee version again? Sure. Come on forward. Do single leg connections, bent knee version, do both legs. Could you do both legs? Absolutely. With both legs, the range is sometimes a little smaller because you don't want this to go in the low back. Being very mindful that they're moving from the gluteal fold, right where the glutes and hamstrings meet, and they're not asking the low back to do this work. So there you are, gang. Just a couple of exercises in some different positions, which is what my client and I were talking about. How do you activate the glute max in a different position that is not the bridge?
If you enjoyed this sequence, be sure and hit that like and subscribe button. Then, check out my on-demand library of Pilates classes linked below. See you next time.